In this video, we'll be taking a look at 4 college basketball games happening on February 11th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 8 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 4 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Alabama versus Mississippi. Alabama walks into this matchup looking less like a road team and more like a storm rolling into town. The record tells part of the story, sitting at 16-7 overall and 6-4 in the conference, but the way they get there is what really pops off the page. They just came out of 2 wild finishes, 100-97 against Texas A&M and 96-92 on the road at Auburn, right after taking a serious punch in that loss at Florida, and instead of wobbling, they came back firing like nothing rattles them anymore. The personality of this group shows up in how they play every single trip up the floor. They push the tempo like it is a point of pride, they hunt early threes, and they treat a 10-second window like enough time to change the whole feel of a game. Scoring around 91.8 points per night and sitting near the very top of the national charts on offense, they turn small openings into full-blown runs, where you look up and the score has flipped faster than feels fair. That kind of style does not care much about gym, zip code, or crowd size. It travels because it is built on pace, spacing, and confidence rather than needing perfect comfort. On the other side, Ole Miss is fighting through the kind of stretch that tests patience. The Rebels sit at 11-12 overall and 3-7 in league play, and a 5-game slide has them searching more than celebrating lately. That trip to Texas summed it up. They scratched all the way back to tie it at 68, then never scored again and missed their last 7 shots, which is the kind of finish that sticks in your head long after you leave the court. They are not hopeless, just stuck in a very human gear, somewhere in the mid-70s on offense and low 70s allowed, with little nagging issues like fouling and rebounding popping up at the worst possible times. Style against style, the contrast is pretty clear. Alabama wants chaos that it can control, quick shots and quick decisions that tilt the math in its favor. Ole Miss prefers something steadier, but when they get dragged out of that comfort zone, you see more forced drives, more frustration fouls, and more long defensive possessions that feel heavier with each whistle. In a spot like this, where one team thrives on the very tempo that has been bothering the other, small cracks tend to widen as legs get tired and decision-making gets a little slower. That is usually when those Alabama spurts arrive, the 8-0 and 11-2 blasts that flip a one-possession game into something that suddenly looks like a steep climb. The track record between these two does not exactly calm Rebels fans either. Alabama has been very comfortable in hostile gyms, winning 13 of its last 17 away from home straight up and showing that this is not a group that needs friendly rims to perform. Against Ole Miss specifically, the recent run has leaned heavily in the Crimson Tide direction, with 7 wins in the last 8 meetings and covers to match in those same spots. Meanwhile, the Rebels have had trouble rewarding their own crowd, with a stretch of 0-5 straight up and 2-7 against the number in their recent home slate, which hints at late-game struggles rather than late-game magic. Put those habits together with the contrasting styles and you get a scenario where, if Alabama gets any kind of rhythm in the second half, the gap on the scoreboard is more likely to grow than shrink in the final few minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Alabama Crimson Tide to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total for this matchup is painted like a scoreboard special, a number that dares everyone to believe it will be track meet from start to finish. It makes sense at first glance, because when people think of Alabama right now, they picture neon offense, quick shots, and box scores that look more like an NBA game than your typical midweek college clash. They score at that 91.8 mark on average and give up their fair share as well, which pushes their combined outcomes into some pretty wild territory. Highlight reels love that kind of pace, and so do casual fans who enjoy seeing the ball splash through the net every few seconds. Here is the thing, markets catch on to that reputation faster than fans think. Numbers creep up, sometimes a little too high, and suddenly you are not betting on whether both teams play well. You are betting on whether both teams play almost perfectly. Recently, both of these squads have been involved in more modest outcomes than that wild image suggests, with several of their last games leaning toward the quieter side of the scoring spectrum. History between them has also seen plenty of nights where the pregame talk promised fireworks and the actual game settled into something more measured, especially once coaching adjustments kicked in after the first media timeout or two. Ole Miss in particular sits in an interesting middle ground. On paper, the Rebels sit in that mid-70s scoring range, which is solid but not exactly a guarantee of a track meet every night. Defensively, they are not elite, but they do manage to hold opponents near the low 40s in field goal percentage and the low 30s from three, and that kind of resistance can quietly shave points off a game total without anyone really noticing until the final buzzer. There is also the emotional piece from that recent meltdown game, where the head coach got tossed and turned the conversation toward fouls, free throws, and respect. When that sort of thing happens, the next step often involves a big internal push toward discipline, cleaner possessions, and fewer unnecessary gambles, and all of that tends to slow things down just a bit. Alabama can obviously score with anybody, but even fast teams have gears. And when they get a cushion, they do not need to treat every possession like a race, and running more clock does not bother them if the scoreboard looks the way they want. A game total that sits on the high side needs long stretches where almost everything falls. Both teams live at the free throw line, and there are very few empty trips. One 3-minute scoring drought, one referee crew that lets contact slide for a while, or one coach who insists on grinding the tempo down, and what once looked like a guaranteed shootout suddenly feels a lot more ordinary. Honestly, that is the kind of environment where the final combined number can land short of what people expect when they only remember the biggest blowout wins and the flashiest offensive clips. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Connecticut versus Butler. Hinkle Fieldhouse on a midweek night. Lights up. Feel that old gym hum. And here comes the current bully of the league walking in a little ticked off after getting punched in the mouth last time out. Connecticut rolls into this one sitting at 22-2 overall and 12-1 in conference play, carrying that big-time top 10 aura, while Butler shows up with a 13-11 mark and a 4-9 run in league games that feels every bit as uneven as it sounds. It is not just about the records, though it is about mood, because Connecticut just had that rare stumble against St. John's at Madison Square Garden, snapping a long winning streak, and their own coach has been very open about wanting a response that looks like a team chasing banners, not compliments. The way Connecticut plays makes that bounce back feel more likely than not, since their identity has turned into this calm, relentless blend of size, physicality, and discipline where they score somewhere in the high 70s while strangling opponents down in the mid-60s. On paper, you can call that efficient offense and sturdy defense, but on the floor it shows up as long arms contesting everything, smart spacing on offense, and a group that rarely looks rushed, even when the building gets loud. Honestly, it looks a lot like a heavyweight that is happy to feel you out for a few rounds, then lean on you until your legs go. The current rotation tells the same story. Solo ball, Terrace Reed Jr., Alex Caravan, Silas DeMary Jr., and Braylon Mullins form a starting group that checks all the boxes you want in a team expected to win big games. Ball handling, shooting, size inside, and the kind of chemistry that comes from logging heavy minutes together night after night. They are all on this roster right now. They are all real contributors, and they are all available, which matters when you are trying to sustain that steady pressure for a full 40 minutes instead of just throwing a quick punch and hoping it lands. It is the sort of lineup that can survive a cold stretch because it guards so well and rebounds with force, and that can turn one good defensive stand into a mini run the other way with almost boring regularity. Butler, on the other hand, leans on a more fragile balance. The Bulldogs can absolutely score, with Finley Bizjack and Michael Ajayi carrying a lot of the offensive load, and on a good night it can feel like they are playing playground ball inside a historic gym, fast and loose and pretty entertaining. The flip side is that their defense has lived in the bottom half of the national rankings, giving up numbers in the high 70s, and when you pair that with the way they like to play, you end up with a team that looks dangerous in spurts but has a hard time stringing together full games against elite opposition. Layer on the current health situation, where Butler's backcourt depth is dented by season-ending losses for Xavier Robinson and Jalen Jackson and the uncertainty around Jamie Kaiser Jr., and you get a rotation that can feel a little stretched whenever foul trouble or fatigue kicks in. There is also the history hanging over this matchup. Connecticut has not dropped a game to Butler, leading the series comfortably, and that includes a meeting earlier this season that turned into a comfortable double-digit win for the Huskies in Hartford, where the physical difference between the teams felt pretty obvious by the final buzzer. Since then, the trajectories have only spread further apart, with Butler sliding through a run of 4 straight double-digit defeats, the latest being a rough night at Marquette where only Bizjack cracked double figures, and Connecticut mostly cruising apart from that recent slip. Trends against the spread have not been kind to Connecticut, with a losing mark there that screams tax by the market, and that has made some people shy about trusting them. But sometimes a poor record against the number just reflects how inflated those expectations have been, not some deep flaw in how the team actually plays. Here is the thing, when you combine Connecticut's fully healthy, veteran core, a proven defensive ceiling, and a coach calling for a sharp reaction, with Butler's shaky defense and banged-up guard room, the matchup tilts toward the side that can impose its style possession after possession. Hinkle can absolutely rock, and for a while that energy might carry Butler into some early punches, but over time it is much easier to picture Connecticut's length and physicality slowly taking the air out of that building, turning live ball turnovers into easy runouts and contested jumpers into long rebounds that start controlled secondary breaks. In a game like that, where one team can keep applying pressure and the other has to hit a lot of tough shots just to keep pace, the path that keeps showing up is the one where the heavy favorite steadily stretches the margin instead of nursing a tight one into the final minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the Connecticut Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring-wise, this matchup can trick you at first glance. You see one team playing in the high 70s on offense and the other in the low 80s. You remember a few wild box scores, and your brain immediately starts sketching out a track meet where both squads trade buckets and race past what their average fan expects. The reality is a bit more subtle, and honestly a bit more interesting. Connecticut's profile starts with defense, not fireworks. They have been holding opponents somewhere in the mid-60s, landing near the top of the national charts in points allowed and defensive efficiency, and they do it with things that travel: body position, length at the rim, and real attention to detail on the perimeter. Teams are shooting a low percentage from the field and from three against them, which means even when their own offense is rolling, it is not because they are flying up and down trading makes, it is because they squeeze the other side possession after possession and then score efficiently on the other end. It looks slower than the raw offensive output might suggest, like a team that takes your favorite toy away and then plays with it right in front of you. Butler's season-long scoring numbers are louder, and they had stretches earlier in the year when they piled up points, especially in the non-conference portion of the schedule. Those games helped build up that image of an up-tempo offense that can light it up from outside and push the ball whenever it gets a chance. Once the opponents got tougher, though, that same attack started to stall, particularly against defenses with size and discipline. The previous meeting with Connecticut turned into a relatively modest scoring night for Butler, and the trip to Marquette produced another low output, which hints at a pattern where this offense looks very different when it has to create against connected, physical defenses. The current backcourt situation for Butler nudges the style in a more controlled direction too. With 2 point guards done for the year and Kaiser Jr. not fully secure, there is extra weight on Bizjack and others to not just score but also manage the ball, get them into sets, and avoid the kind of live ball mistakes that can turn into instant points the other way. That kind of pressure often leads to more deliberate half-court possessions, more clock used, and a little less of the carefree, early shot rhythm that can juice totals. It is not guaranteed, of course, but the ingredients are there for a game that tilts toward careful rather than chaotic, especially against a Connecticut defense that punishes sloppy decisions. Recent scoring trends suggest plenty of high-scoring affairs for both teams, with a run of games landing over projected expectations that has probably shaped how people talk about them. Those past results, though, are part of why public perception leans so heavily toward offense here, and that perception has a way of catching up when a disciplined defensive group walks into the gym. When you strip away the noise and look at how these particular styles mesh, the picture that forms is one where Connecticut's defense drags the overall pace down a bit. Butler's offense struggles to reach its usual home number against length and pressure, and the combined total ends up a notch or two below what the raw season averages might lead you to believe. Even with some late fouls, a handful of free throws, and the usual conference physicality, the most reasonable expectation is a scoreboard that feels a touch quieter than the reputation suggests. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Providence versus Seton Hall. On paper, this matchup looks like the usual Big East script where the home team gets the love and the traveling side gets treated like an afterthought, but it does not really feel that simple once you sit with it for a bit. The market leans into Seton Hall as the safer, cleaner profile at home, yet the way these two actually play right now tilts the conversation toward the visitors, keeping this thing very tight. Providence is chaos in jersey form, living in games that turn into track meets, where both teams trade punches and the scoreboard operator basically gets a workout. That kind of rhythm is uncomfortable for a favorite that prefers structure, but it is the exact playground where an underdog can hang around, absorb a couple of runs, then suddenly be right there in the final 2 minutes. Even with the roster bruised, Providence has shown it can function with a shorter bench, which sounds like a problem but sometimes simplifies the whole picture. When you strip the rotation down, roles get clearer, the ball moves with more purpose, and everyone knows exactly which shots belong to them. They already proved in recent games that they can generate offense even while key names sit in street clothes, so this is not a new shock to the system, it is more like their new normal. You can feel that looseness in the way they play, almost like a pickup run that somehow still fits inside a college game plan. And that kind of unpredictability naturally favors the side that is getting the cushion, not laying it. Seton Hall, on the other hand, is much more comfortable keeping things controlled and physical, where every cut gets bumped and every catch feels contested. Their identity leans into a defense-first mindset, with an offense that is solid but hardly explosive, more methodical than flashy. That type of approach is great for winning, but it is not always great for covering comfortably because it shrinks the number of possessions and leaves the door open for the opponent to linger right behind them on the scoreboard. They have also dealt with their own injury hits, so the margin for error in their lineups is not as wide as it might look if you only glance at their name and home court advantage. When one team wants structure and the other is content living in a bit of chaos, the side catching points tends to be the one that benefits from all the weird bounces, late whistles, and random shot-making swings that always seem to show up in conference play. Providence has already seen this Seton Hall defense once, so the surprise factor is gone, and that familiarity usually helps the team that needs to improvise and find pockets to score rather than the one trying to impose order. So while the favorite has the cleaner resume and the comfy gym, the dog has the volatility, the rhythm, and the kind of game script that can turn a big ask into a very manageable one by the time we get into those final possessions. As our first pick for this matchup, the Providence Friars to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Providence wants a game that looks like a sprint, where both teams are flying, shots are going up early in the clock, and the tempo feels almost reckless at times. Seton Hall prefers the opposite, a slow, physical grinder where every trip is earned, the ball sticks in the half court, and the score sits lower than you might expect for a modern college game. When those two worlds collide, something has to give, and usually it is the pace that bends toward the team that guards, rebounds, and forces you to walk the ball up the floor. On the surface, Providence's season-long box scores scream points, with plenty of nights where both they and their opponents land in the high-scoring neighborhood together. But numbers need context. Some of those huge outputs came in multi-overtime marathons or against defenses that were far more forgiving, games where you could feel from the opening minutes that both teams were happy to trade buckets rather than grind stops. Seton Hall does not live in that universe very often. Seton Hall's defensive mentality pulls games into a narrower band, where opponents see tough contests on shots, crowded driving lanes, and long, patient possessions. They are comfortable winning games where neither side gets rolling, and they have already shown they can pull Providence into a more controlled style in a previous meeting, which ended up finishing well shy of the loftier scoring expectations that were set for it. That earlier clash is a nice little preview of the kind of environment we are likely to see again, only this time with both teams even more aware of what the other wants to do. The injury situations quietly lean toward a slower, more deliberate game as well. Providence is missing multiple key offensive pieces, which naturally trims their creation, their shooting depth, and even their willingness to push at every chance because the staff has to think about legs and foul trouble across a shorter rotation. Seton Hall's own absences cut into their flexibility too, which can lead to longer, more cautious stretches where the goal is simply to get a good look and get back on defense rather than push the tempo and risk a wild exchange. February conference games, especially between teams that already know each other, often turn into half-court chess matches rather than fireworks shows. You can almost picture a score that lives in that tighter, more modest range where every empty trip feels huge and every made jumper sounds a little louder than it should. The style, the personnel, the familiarity, and the way both benches are likely thinking about surviving the grind all point toward a game where the scoreboard does not fully match the reputation of one side's season-long fireworks. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Colorado versus Texas Tech. Colorado heading into Lubbock feels like a team walking straight into someone else's comfort zone. The building is loud, the crowd is wired, and the home side is used to turning that noise into momentum while visiting teams try to remember what calm even feels like. Texas Tech has built its identity around that home edge, stacking strong performances in this arena while leaning on a level of consistency that travels from game to game, not just highlight to highlight. Colorado, on the other hand, tends to look a lot more fragile when you pull them out of their own building, as if the further they get from home, the more their weaknesses start to glow under the lights. The first time these two met here, the matchup turned into one of those games that makes you check the score twice. Texas Tech controlled plenty of the key stretches, but Colorado showed enough fight to hang around and stay inside the number, which always sticks in the heads of people who remember spreads as much as final scores. Since then, the story has shifted in a quiet but important way. The market has treated Texas Tech as a team that has earned more respect, while Colorado has felt more like a squad that can surge for stretches but struggles to put together full games that stand up over 40 minutes in tough environments. Texas Tech's strength shows up not only in how often they win here, but in how they handle different styles that come through this gym. They have dealt with physical opponents, high-tempo opponents, and teams that want to shoot from deep, and they keep finding ways to lean on their balance and their depth. Colorado tends to drift into games where their offense tries to cover for everything, and that is a tricky way to live when you are up against a group that is comfortable making you work for every clean look. Honestly, it can feel like one team is built for these long, grinding conference nights, while the other is hoping their shot-making can keep them afloat long enough to steal one. There is a real difference between a team that knows exactly who it is at home and a team that is still trying to translate its strengths to the road. Texas Tech settles into what it wants to be, using the energy in the building as fuel rather than pressure. Colorado often has to walk a tightrope, trying to keep pace while also dealing with possessions that feel heavier and more difficult as the game wears on. When you add in the way Texas Tech has handled quality opponents in this building, compared with how Colorado has looked in some of their tougher spots away from home, the matchup leans toward the side that can more reliably pull away rather than merely escape. Games like this do not always turn into art, but they often reveal who can string together stops while still scoring enough to stretch the margin late. The favorite that lives in its own gym, backed by a fan base that feeds off every defensive stand, usually has more ways to create that breathing room. Colorado is dangerous in bursts, but asking them to hang wire to wire in this particular setting requires a level of control they rarely show when they pack their bags and leave home. As our first pick for this matchup, the Texas Tech Red Raiders to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Both teams lean naturally toward offense, and they do it in a way that feels comfortable rather than forced, as if scoring is the part of the game that relaxes them. Defensive consistency is not really the calling card for either side, and that combination tends to create games where the scoreboard operator gets very busy very early. When you have two groups that would rather keep flowing than grinding, possessions add up quickly, and empty trips are more the exception than the rule. Colorado's recent stretch of games has looked like something you might see in a fast-paced video game. Scores push higher, opponents find ways to get to their numbers, and the Buffs lean on their own ability to answer rather than clamp down. They get into those up-and-down exchanges where both teams trade runs, the crowd swings one way, then the other, and the total quietly keeps climbing while everyone argues about momentum. That style might be thrilling for neutral fans and stressful for anyone who likes defense, but it is perfect for a matchup where you care about how many times the ball goes through the net. Texas Tech is not exactly shy about scoring either. They are comfortable putting up big numbers, especially at home, and they have already shown they can hang high totals on quality opposition. Even when they face strong programs, they find ways to keep the offense humming, whether it is through pace, spacing, or just making tough shots that break opponents' spirits. When you blend that with Colorado's habit of getting pulled into free-flowing games, you end up with a recipe that usually leans toward a busy scoreboard rather than a rock fight. Their first meeting already hinted at this rhythm. The earlier matchup still reached a healthy total even without both teams catching absolute fire, which says a lot about how naturally these two generate points. Nothing about the way they play has suddenly flipped. Both still prefer to lean on shot making, both still give up looks that can be punished, and both still have stretches where scoring feels easier than getting a stop. Honestly, when a game sets up like that, what usually decides things for the total is not whether points will come, but how long both sides can keep the gas pedal down. Picture a second half where one team starts to build a lead, the other chases, and possessions keep coming in waves. You get transition chances, second chance buckets, and late free throws as one side tries to extend the game. Those little extra possessions, those extra whistles, they matter more than people think when you are watching the number climb. With these two, the most natural outcome is a game that feels more like a shootout than a slog, and that kind of rhythm tends to pull the total in one clear direction. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.